views expressed on this program are not those of intellectualradio.com, its subsidiaries, or sponsors. Encouraging, educating, and empowering you into action. This is Warriors Talk with your host, Lady ReShell.
Hello, hello. Welcome to Warriors Talk with author and founder Lady ReShell, where we move away from awareness towards action. It's Health and Wellness Monday, and our topic for today is how to cope with the physical effects of grief. We are live on Intellectual Radio. We just heard from the Drive at 5 with Roman. Keep it locked right here on Intellectual Radio and allow us to feed your brain. On the last episode of Warriors Talk, Rizal and I talked about the mistakes that men make in dating. Go over to YouTube, type in Intellectual Radio, and stay connected for any episodes you may have missed. The quote of the day is, "Grieving doesn't make you imperfect, it makes you human." We are grateful for our sponsor. We have Emanuel C.O.G.I.C with Pastor Michael Richardson. You can stop by every Sunday morning at 10:15 a.m. on Facebook for your spiritual food. Let's hear a word from our sponsor.
Greetings, I am Pastor Michael Richardson.
And I am First Lady Anastasia Richardson from the Emanuel Church of God in Christ. We're located at 3058 West Van Buren in Chicago, Illinois. We are building upon a solid foundation.
And we're inviting you to join us every Sunday morning on Facebook Live at Emanuel C.O.G.I.C at 10:15 Central Standard Time. And you can also view our videos on our YouTube channel at Emanuel C.O.G.I.C-MR. Once again, this is Pastor Michael Richardson
and First Lady Anastasia Richardson, and we're from the Emanuel Church of God in Christ. We are building upon a solid foundation.
Grief is not always thought of as a full body experience, but just as grief can affect the mental health, it also can have an effect on your physical aspects. Physical symptoms may not come with every kind of grief, but intense grief, for example, that's caused by the death of a child or a partner, can bring about a side effect that may feel more physical than anything else. If you have ever lost a loved one, then you most likely have experienced grief. Joining me today is our healthy solution expert with over 20 years experience as a physician, family physician that is, impacting lives every single day. Hello, Dr. Michelle.
Hello, Lady ReShell. How are you this Monday?
I am good. So excited to see you. You look so beautiful today.
Thank you. And you as always.
Thank you. Are you ready for Christmas or for the holidays?
I'm getting there. I still have shopping to do, but that's what I do every year. Okay, so I'm always kind of waiting to the last minute.
Yeah, that's me.
What about you?
That's me. I always wait maybe like the week of, like I know what I want to get. And for the big important items that I know I can't really walk in the store and get, I'll get those. But the little stuff, I know I'm waiting until that week and I'm running around like crazy. So
yeah, that's what we do. Why change that now, right?
Why? It works. It works. I love the rush too. It works.
Yeah.
So today's topic is, I think it's really important, how to cope with the physical effects of grief, especially right now with the holidays up on us and with us still dealing with the COVID-19 virus, with all of that balled up into one, grief can really play a role, not just with losing loved ones, but just being in the midst of all of this can cause grief. So I just want everybody to know that there's different types of grief, and it's just not because you lost a loved one. It could be maybe you lost a job, you may have gotten divorced. It could be a lot of different things that revolves around grief, but it's how you deal with that grief is what we really want to focus on, and what that grief does to you, especially when it's left unchecked.
Yeah, you're right. Because this is a joyous time, right? It's the holiday season, but we are in such sort of, state of change in our lives, in our world, that sometimes you may be grieving the loss of not just a relationship, your job, but of someone. We've had over 800,000 people die from COVID, right, in the last almost 2 years. And so people, even though it is the holiday season, people are going through grief in all sorts of different ways. And this topic is really timely. I have to tell you just a quick personal thing is that yesterday, a classmate of mine, we graduated in 1988, she passed of COVID. And she passed on her birthday. You know, God works in mysterious ways. But I think about that because her children are grieving, her close family and friends are grieving. And so, in the midst of this joyous holiday season, it's okay to feel grief. As you said, grief can manifest in different ways. We think of that intense, sadness and sometimes, depression or anxiety or any of that, but it also can manifest in physical ways because we know that the system between the emotional and the physical is connected in our bodies, right? Even if you have a big presentation, if I have a big presentation, maybe I feel butterflies in my stomach because of, nervousness. So it's all connected, and it's important to recognize not only the emotional, but the physical.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. The first one that I wanted to really dive into, Dr. Michelle, is having heart problems as it relates to grief, because we know that the heart, is one of our biggest organs, and we know when we're having issues with that, it can affect everything in our body.
Yeah, and that's a great one to start with because it is very important. We know that if you think about when you have that intense sort of sadness and grief, even from loss of relationship or a loved one, you feel a heartache, right? And it feels physical. And we hear about people say, oh, someone died of a broken heart. Well, what happens when you have that sort of intense grief is there is a release of the stress hormone, cortisol, and adrenaline in your body. And that causes physical changes. It can actually, the adrenaline, there's something called the broken heart syndrome. So when you get that rush of adrenaline, temporarily, it can cause spasm or constriction of the arteries. It can cause certain parts of the heart to not pump as well. It's all luckily temporary for the most part. In a normal, healthy person, we might feel some symptoms and it's temporary, it goes away because it's not a permanent blockage like a heart attack. But if you think about if it was someone who had heart disease or had issues, right, you would be concerned if you were having any chest pain or shortness of breath, right? So it's important to know that, yes, the intense grief can cause this physical change, which for the most part is temporary. And mostly I'll have to say it occurs in women, occurs in maybe women over 50, but you can feel physical chest pain and shortness of breath. But if you are at high risk, if those symptoms don't go away, if they're severe, if it's something really different, you should definitely be talking to your provider about that.
When I was doing the research, it mentioned that that there was a study that found that when you lose a loved one, that there's an increased risk of you having a heart attack.
Yeah, there was one study that showed that, again, because of that, those physical things, right? When you get that rush of adrenaline, that cortisol, the stress of grief can make your blood pressure go up, right? And so you've got to listen to your body. You've got to listen to, sometimes we might think, oh, it's just part of the grieving process if we have pain. But yes, there are studies that show that there can be a little bit of an increased risk to some people after a big grief event. So important to listen to your body. If you are at risk, if you're having chest pain, you're having shortness of breath, you should talk to your provider. You should be calling your provider or going to the emergency room depending on your symptoms.
Yeah, I mean, just to be on the safe side, and it could just be just the grief, but don't just brush it off like that's what it is. Just just make sure, because especially if
Mhm.
it's been going on for a long period of time.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes we'll deal with it till we can't bear it no more, and then it's like, okay, now I need to go to the emergency room.
Right. I always say that it's the people who really need to go to the emergency room that tend to say, "Oh no, I'll wait till the morning," and they'll sit back. I'll tell patients all the time, "No, you need to go to the emergency room if you're having these symptoms." And so that's important to know. And I know people are trying to stay out of the ER as much as possible in the time of COVID. But anytime you're having, chest pressure, chest pain, you're high risk, you've had heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, things aren't getting better, you need to either call your provider immediately or go to the emergency room.
Mhm. One of the things that I always attribute to my cancer diagnosis, Dr. Michelle, is stress. And I felt like I was under a stressful situation and my immune system was compromised. And that's when, those genes had a chance to go rogue, right? So talk about having a Lord immunity, when you're in grief,
Yeah,
one of those physical
yeah.
effects of it.
Yeah, because grief is a stress to the body. We know that stress in the acute or what we call the immediate or long term can lower your immune system. So people can be more apt to catch infections, catch colds, flu. And so, in the midst of your grief and your sadness, you're not really thinking about that, right? And it's always important. I always talk about the people around the person who's immediately affected need to be aware of some of those things so they can be a support to that person who's in the midst. But yeah, so grief, because of the inflammatory factors that are released in the midst of stress, can lower your immune system. So important, as we always talk about, to shore up your immune system. Make sure you're eating correctly, because people in the midst of grief tend not to eat very well, right? Either overwhelmed time and they're not eating, which can even make that even worse. So, when people are going through grief, it's nice to bring them food, right? Bring them healthy option foods, because they're probably not going to ask you for help, maybe, right? They're in the midst of what they're going through and they may not ask. So, if we are that person that's being supportive, take them some food. That is being proactive and they'll be so appreciative of it. But yes, that's a good point, Rochelle.
Can you say, wow, this is so helpful?
Yes, it's something we have to talk about, especially because I know we all, every last one of us listening and those who are not, have gone through some form of grief, especially in the last couple of years, losing a loved one, losing friends, relationships, as you mentioned, divorce, loss of a child. All of those things are tremendously impactful to our lives, and we sort of just we sometimes deal with it and go on, not understanding what it's doing to us physically.
I can remember, this is funny. I can remember, it's funny now, but I can remember going through my first heartbreak, doc, and it was almost like I was grieving a death. And I was like,
Yeah.
what is this feeling? I was really I sat back and I had a chance to reflect on it. And it actually felt like somebody had died, but I have to see this person because the person is still alive. But I felt my insides grieve, like I felt it. And that was the worst feeling. It felt like something like that person had died. And I was going through all of the different stages of grief, but that person was still alive.
Yes, yes. And that's why we don't just talk about grief with just the loss of a person that's, passed on, but relationship grief is intense. I remember that too, with a bad breakup. Did you feel physical heartache, right? Emotional stress can cause physical pain. It is a known fact, right? And we talked about the heart, we've talked about the immune system, it can upset your digestive system. We know that, right? You can get horrible heartburn, you can get diarrhea or constipation, and those things are also important to recognize.
Can you say yes? She think we all have
Yes.
been there.
Yes, yes.
I think once you go through that first one, it kind of braces you for if it happens again, then you're like, okay, I know what's happening. I know how to get through this. But that first initial one, you're like, ooh, I'm about to die. I am not going to make it. Oh my
Right,
goodness.
right.
A horrible feeling. I can remember my son being 13 and he was in his room laying in his bed, and normally he's just really active doing stuff. And I'm like, what's wrong with him? Like he's really quiet. And I went and he was laying in the bed, little tears just dropping. And I'm like, what's
Oh,
wrong? And then I just looked at him. I said, you ain't gonna even remember this girl by the time you get 18. By the time you get 30, you are not gonna remember this girl. Like, go ahead and cry your tears, baby. You're not gonna remember her. And I mentioned it to him the other day. He was like, Mom, I still remember her. I still remember. I'm like,
right. And that's a good point too, because men, we got to think about our men too, right? Our boys and our men, right? They also feel grief, right? And they can still, maybe externally, they may not show it as much. But it's important to know that they feel the same things women feel. And even going back to the heart issues, it's important because men are more likely to have heart disease, that they are aware of those things too.
I feel like you're right. I feel like they carry so much, but they don't release it. They don't, I mean, well, let me say they don't know a healthy way to release it, should I say? Like
Hmm.
healthy ways to cope with it. Because I guess we look at them as being so strong and, they can handle
Right.
it. We tend
Right.
not to maybe check in on them as much.
Yeah, isn't that's a really, really good point, right? We've got to check in on our men too, right? They are the strong external, going to take care of everything. But underneath all of that, they're going through their own grief and symptoms and sadness for whatever loss that they're going through. And so important to check on them, to ask, how are you doing? And just as I said with bringing food to people who are going through a grieving process because they tend not to, eat very well. It's important to do other things, such as, take them out, even the guys, right? Let's go out. Let's go and, do some things because sometimes they're overwhelmed. There's a feeling of guilt that I don't want to have fun because that person is gone, right? And so there's a normal grieving period, and that's okay if you don't want to do things, right? But those, we know when we say time heals everything, if those grieving symptoms don't seem to be getting better over weeks or months, right? Then we may be talking more about long depression versus just the reactive grief. And it's always important, we're talking about the physical, but your emotional health, to get help if you're feeling lots of guilt, what we call not wanting to do anything at all, not talk to family or friends. Um, that's a different level of depression than just reactionary grief. And we want to make sure that we capture that too.
Yes, that survivor's remorse is real. I felt that with my dad when he passed away from cancer because I just knew like, okay, he's gonna get through this. It may be rough, but he's gonna make it. Like God is gonna heal him. And then when he passed away, I was just like, what? Like what just happened?
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna be honest with you, and I don't know how healthy this is, but I have not grieved my dad's death yet. I haven't.
When did he pass away?
In 2016.
Okay, yeah. And everybody deals with things in their own way, in their own time, right? And that's okay too. Some people want to talk to someone about it. Some people kind of deal with it on their own. But it's every we don't look at, how someone handles grief as whether that's okay or not. It's okay to handle it in whatever way um, helps that person to also be able to survive and carry on with their lives while having good memories of that person as well.
Yeah, I know it's not healthy, but I just haven't addressed it yet. I think it kind of reminds me of my own mortality with cancer. So
Mm-hmm.
I know eventually I'm going to have to face it and deal with it. Um, I haven't let it stop me from moving forward to doing what I have to do,
Yeah.
but I know I have to face it. So I just
Yeah.
haven't done it yet.
It's tough. It's tough, right? Like I said, we deal with grief in many different ways. And I always talk when I talk to patients about, how they are feeling emotionally, how they have reacted to something. If they're not feeling, or if they're feeling sad or anxious or um, feeling like there's a lot of maybe childhood traumas that they haven't dealt with, I always tell them, talk to someone. You know, that could be a therapist, could be a pastor, could be anyone to allow you to work through what it is that might be causing you to feel that way. And everyone should have someone to talk to, right? Either a therapist or a pastor or a friend, if that person can offer you the good advice and support. Um, it's all normal. It's all normal.
I think for me, like my writing helps me to, it's therapeutic for me. And so
Yeah.
I've been working on this book about my dad. It's called The Silent Cries of My Father. And
Oh,
so it helps me, kind of release some stuff,
that's
about him.
awesome.
But yeah, it's a lot. So
Yeah,
that's
that's awesome.
yeah, I know the grief, it's real, and you can't let it sit. You can't let it sit on you and just be a ticking time bomb because you haven't dealt with it.
Yeah, if you're feeling, and that's to anyone listening, if you're feeling overwhelmed by your feelings, reach out to a therapist, reach out to a counselor. I always say that having someone listen to what you have been through or and are going through, who is a completely separate third party, not invested in either side necessarily, can be therapeutic, right? They can listen to what you're feeling, what your, experience has been, and use their experience to help you work through it. So, nothing wrong with seeing a therapist, counselor, to sort of what we call unpack some of those things um, from our childhood that make us who we are. And then we learn a lot about ourselves in the process.
That's true. I think a lot of times we don't deal with the different traumas that we have, and it kind of just keeps us stifled. So I think once you can deal with it, you can move past it, and then you can better learn how to deal with other issues that may come your way better. So,
Mhm.
but when you just
Mhm.
be like, I'm okay, I'm gonna keep working and be busy and not really, deal with the issues.
Yeah, and you've got up here, body aches and pains because when we hold a lot in, we don't realize even, if we don't deal with our grieving, you tense up, you tighten up, all the muscles and the nerves, become tight,
Yeah,
and which leads to more inflammation in the body, which can then make your normal aches and pains, your normal arthritis pain even worse. And that's known as well, right? So again, we these are the things that all that emotional stress and grief can lead to these physical symptoms and pains that you may not necessarily relate to your stress or your grief, but it certainly can because we know when we're stressed, right, we hold things in our shoulders and in our neck, and all of that releases inflammation throughout your body, which can make you feel even worse, which then can make you lead to not sleeping well, right, not wanting to get out of bed because everything hurts, and it can become a sort of a vicious cycle. We haven't really gotten to some of the things you can do when you're having those inflammation and body aches. Staying hydrated is important, right? And eating the right foods, but staying hydrated. Your body is 80% water. You got to be drinking water, to get the cells moving and functioning right and get some of that inflammation out of the body.
I've always heard that exercise is good with that too. Like a lot of times I think we just think exercise for certain things, but it's good for relieving stress. It's good for, taking your mind off of that, because we already know it releases, those chemicals in your body. And so if we're utilizing that, that's something that we can control. If you have something you can control to make you feel better and be healthier.
And studies show that 30 minutes of walking daily can decrease depression symptoms, right? So even beyond what it's going to do for your cardiovascular health, because for your fitness and cardiovascular fitness, we talk about exercising 50 to 60 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week and all of that. But for really helping your depression symptoms, your mood, improving fatigue, 30 minutes of walking, preferably if you're outside. I know it's kind of cold and dreary these days, but even now, if we can bundle up, because it's not that cold out yet, if you can bundle up and go and walk outside for 30 minutes, you will feel so much better. The vitamin D, even though it's cloudy, you're still getting vitamin D from the sun, the fresh air, the nature. All of that has been shown to affect our mood and our state of depression.
Awesome. So these are some things that we can do. We don't, like I said, a lot of times we just sit and we try to dismiss some things or put it in the back burner and say, I'll deal with it later. And then it comes creeping up on us. Then all of a sudden we sitting in that emergency room with some massive pain or something that's been sitting on us for too long that we didn't deal with. So this is just all about taking control and having these tools that you can use to combat having these physical things that grief can cause. So I say, if you have these tools, use them. So that, again, when you get to be 60, 70, 80 years old, you want to have a good quality of life. You don't want to be, and not to knock the people that, are like, they're hunched over, they can't really walk, they really don't have a lot of movement, they can't do a lot of things. And some of it has to do with things that we really haven't addressed in our younger years that we took for granted, thinking that we have this long life to live. So with that being said, Dr. Michelle, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to hear from one of our sponsors, which is our affordable book editing services with MyLeah Symone, and it's book editing services without skimping on quality. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about some of the myths that's dealing with grief.
If you're looking for an affordable book editor, then look no further. I'm MyLeah Symone. I'm a freelance book editor, and I offer affordable book editing services such as proofreading and manuscript critiques. It's time to work with an editor who knows and loves stories. Head over to my website, www.myleahsymone.com, to book me today.
So we're talking about how to cope with the physical effects of grief. And we have Dr. Michelle here. We are live on Intellectual Radio. So if you are just tuning in, share the show, invite someone else in on the show that I'm sure can benefit from this information, because we have all dealt with grief in our lifetime. So Dr. Michelle, did you have any other information that you want to give out as it relates to what we could do? I know you just gave us a mouthful before we took a break, but is there anything else that we left off that we can do as an individual to just help us deal with the physical aspects of grief?
Yeah, so we talked about a few of those things, right? So we talked about when you are feeling down, to reach out for help, and that if we are the friend or the loved one of the person in the midst, to be proactive about reaching out and helping, taking them out, bringing them food, calling and not texting, calling people on the phone to talk, those type of things. And then really for those of us who may be going through that grief, is to listen to your body and recognize if something doesn't feel right or is different, right? Because we talked about the different organs in different parts of the body it can affect, from your stomach and your GI system to your heart system, right? To even the nerves and your body and the muscles and the inflammation and decreasing your immune system and all those things that grief can do to us because it's such a big stress to the body. We just have to be aware of that and then help each other out, because it's important to take care of ourselves in the midst of that. People may not be getting enough sleep, or they're sleeping too much, right? We talked about they might not be eating, or maybe they're eating a lot, because we talk about emotional eaters, right? And the food makes us feel good. So just being aware and recognizing, and those of us who are supporting the person to recognize those changes that we can impact.
Yes. MyLeah said, thank you for sharing this information. So important to reach out for help and take care of yourself.
Yes, yes.
So you just got done talking about, the eating aspects, and that was my number 5 about coping, like unhealthy coping mechanism that we use. And they said eating, overeating, and then you mentioned like not eating enough when you're going through that grieving process. That it can be harmful.
Yes, yeah, because both of those things, either under eating or overeating, doesn't provide the right nutritional balance. We always talk on your show about how food is medicine. Food helps your body to function at its best. And so when we're not getting the right quantity or quality of foods, things feel even worse. You can feel even more fatigued and tired, and all of that that goes along with grief.
Awesome. So you hit on a lot of the ones that I had. You mentioned my number 4 was digestive issues. It could be stressful, especially when your insides are all tensed up.
Mm-hmm.
You may have the diarrhea, or you may be constipated because of what that stress is doing to your body.
Yeah, and we talk about stress ulcers, right? Because stress, grief, a major stress to the body, can increase the stomach acid content, which then cause that acid eats away at the lining of your stomach, and you get an ulcer. Before you get the sore, which is the ulcer, you get acid reflux, you get all that heartburn, and stress plays a role in that. And so we've got to recognize that and know how to treat it when we feel those symptoms, be it changing our diet, be it taking prescription medicine, or whatever your provider recommends for you. But just to recognize that emotional stress causes physical changes with increased acid in the stomach, which can lead to other things.
Kenya says definitely plays a major role. I think she was talking about what we said earlier. All of the different things that you can do. So I had I think you covered this one too, Doc. Sleeping problems and fatigue. You don't want to do anything when you're going through grief. And sometimes it paralyzes people.
Right. And you can't sleep, right? Your mind is always going, you're not getting enough sleep, and then which leads to the fatigue. But we've got to recognize that you can do simple things, to help with sleep. You can try, chamomile tea. You can try actually white noise, like having the sound of the waves or rain, because we all keep our phones by us. If you have that running in the background, it can put you to sleep. It's soothing. So sometimes those sort of natural things can help if you don't want to take medication to get to sleep. And then simple things like taking care of yourself, like taking a bath before you go to bed, and recognizing that you're not getting enough sleep, because that not getting enough sleep the next day can lead to decreased concentration, which can cause problems if you're driving, and put you at risk. So,
I know that all too well. Dr. Michelle, what would you say is the important thing for someone to do in managing grief?
Yes. It's hard, but I would say one of the important things in managing your grief is to recognize that what you're feeling is normal as far as your emotional, right? The sadness, it's all an emotional part of losing someone or losing that relationship, and knowing that being in tune to know that I know that my heartache is causing me, it's upsetting my stomach, or I'm not sleeping well because I'm sad and I'm grieving. If you recognize that and then can make some adjustments to what you're doing, or asking for help, or doing some of the things that we talked about, right? Be it going for a walk, be it trying some of those natural things to help you sleep, be it talking to someone if you're feeling so overwhelmed that you don't want to do anything, that you can't get out of bed, that you feel lots of guilt, right? Um, so it's important to recognize that in yourself, and for those around us to offer support and recognize that too. Because sometimes when you're in the midst of it, you can't see it as those that are around you.
It says that a study was done in 2017 found that spouses who were bereaved by suicide had a higher risk of developing sleep issues. And like you said, sleep is supposed to be when the body is and the brain is repairing itself. And if we're not getting sleep, it's not doing what it's supposed to do.
Yes, yes. And I would say that, when you are a family member of someone who has committed suicide, you may feel a lot of guilt, right? You may wonder what you could have done differently. Those sorts of things can affect your sleep. It keeps you up at night. Your mind is always going. And then again, the lack of sleep causes your cortisol level, your stress level, stress hormone cortisol to increase, which leads to other things like overeating, because cortisol is that hormone that can cause us to overeat. It can cause high blood pressure. There's a lot of things that, right, we don't think about when we talk about that grief and that emotional pain that we feel.
So why is it important to manage grief? And I know you
Yes.
already covered it, but
Yeah, but it's important to talk about again too, right? It's important because that grief can be overwhelming and affect other parts of your life and your relationship with the rest of your friends and family, right? And it's important to manage it because we want you to have a good quality of life, and we want you to move through those phases of grief so that you can remember that person, and be able to still have good memories and function and release any guilt, and release any untoward feelings that you may have, so that you can continue to be healthy for yourself. Because if that grief is not managed, it can be become long-term depression and anxiety, which may need medical management, or again, therapeutic management to help someone move through those symptoms. And we've already talked about how grief in its overwhelming stage can cause all those other physical things. And if we don't manage it, it's going to affect our health in the long term.
wow. I want to talk about some of the myths and facts as it relates to grief, because when you're going through something, and I think people mean well, but they always have something to say when you're going through grief on how they feel that you should be going through your grieving process. So one of the common facts or myth is it talks about being strong. So it says, I shouldn't bring anyone down, bothering them with my pain.
Right, definitely a myth, right? Because we talked about that's how we sometimes will feel. We don't want to talk and bother someone else with how we're feeling, and it's important to talk about it. And again, if we're that friend and we know that that's how people feel, then we have to be proactive and call and say, hey, how are you doing today? I just wanted to, call and check on you. Let me take you out for coffee or something, because listen to that person. Because yeah, we feel like we don't want to burden someone with our sadness if they're having a great day. That's how we feel, right? We don't want to bother them with our grief. But it's important to talk about it, because that helps us to move through the grieving process, and it's important for those around us to understand that that person needs to talk about it.
Totally agree. Hey, Lisa. Lisa says good evening. Thank you
Hello,
for
hi
joining us.
Lisa.
So let's talk about, it says, and this is really an important one, and I know a lot of people who are Christians probably go through this. It says, if I only had enough faith, I wouldn't be struggling so much.
Oh, yeah, definitely not true. Okay, I have faith. I always say, listen, God is working in each of us. He gives us the tools to help other people, right? God gave doctors the tools to help, therapists the tools to help. So you can still have faith. You can have faith in your God. You can talk to Him and still use all the resources and friends and supports around you, because He is in the midst of that too.
Wow, totally agree. Lisa said, great topic. She hates that she's late.
Oh,
Okay, be kind.
we're glad you could join us.
We are glad. All right, myth or fact, this is another one. It says, if I can't get over this loss, I will never be happy again.
Oh, yeah. It's hard. You can still always be think about that person, and when we say get over it, right? Grief is a process. It's always sort of with us in some levels, and you will be happy again. But again, in the midst of it, you can't feel that, you can't see it, but it certainly is not true that if you don't get over that grief. But get over, is that the right word? It's sort of moving through the different stages of it.
Time heals all things.
Time can heal all things. Time can, right? We know that in the midst of the loss, of the acuteness of that loss, things feel so overwhelming, right? But as we move through from, shock to acceptance, right? That things feel better, right? We can remember that person with a few less tears and more laughs. And so that's sort of the process of when people say get over or move through grief, is what we're talking about. That time can make things feel better. And as Lisa said, we have to be intentional about being happy as well, right? We have to know that we will be okay, right? You'll be okay. Talk to someone, remember good times. Sometimes it's hard to do that in the acute stage, especially if it's fresh, right? I still think about my classmate who passed yesterday and what her family is going through. But time can heal those wounds.
Yeah. I totally agree, Lisa. We do have to be intentional. I had a Facebook friend whose son was in a coma for 30 days, and like every day, she was like updating us. I think he was like in his early 20s. And so I'm just like, okay, I'm praying, like I'm hoping this little boy, he's a man, but
Oh, wow.
to a mother, you're looking like, I didn't feel her pain as a mother, but I was sitting there like as a mother who has a son that's in his 20s. That situation, you won't want to see your baby in a coma. And then he ended up passing away. And I was just like, oh my God. Like, just as a mother, I felt for her as a mother, so, and this is what I like about her. She said, I am not okay. I'm not okay. And that's what she put on her Facebook status. I am not okay. Like, she was letting people know. And she said, for those of you who keep saying, don't ask me how I'm doing. That's what she said. Don't ask me how I'm doing. I am not okay. She just lost a son who was in a coma for 30 days. Like, I'm not okay. Stop asking me that. I'm not.
And
So,
everybody reacts in different ways, right? And we have to be accepting of that, right? Because it might not be how someone else may have shown their grief, reacted, right? But we have to accept that that person is going through their grief the way they know how, and that helps them through their process.
yeah.
And that grieving process is individual for everyone.
Thank you. That's important. Kenya said, I really am not sure what
Which
that's saying. Which time
statement?
heals all things, Kenya? Was that's the last thing we talked about, I think. Time heals all things. Is that what you were referring to? Lisa said, let me know, Kenya. Lisa said, I had a meltdown last week, but allowed myself to feel and the tears to flow. It made me feel better. It's not easy.
Important to cry, shout like that woman, your friend said, I'm not okay, right? Whatever, that's exactly right, Lisa. Whatever works for that person in the midst of their situation and in their grief, right? And for Lisa, she cried and it made her feel better. Releasing those emotions, right? Releasing the emotions actually helps those stress hormones to decrease. When you hold that all in, it increases the stress. Good point.
That was my next one. It said about getting angry won't help. Getting angry will not help anything. And like you just said, I think it's still an emotion, and as long as you get it out in a healthy way, I think, and not harm anybody or yourself.
Yes, in a healthy way. Because we know that through the process, people feel all of those things, right? They feel denial, then they feel anger, then they feel sadness, right? And then they feel, some denial and acceptance and all of those things. And so all those emotions through that spectrum are okay. Like you said, we want to express those in a way that's not harmful to anyone else, but that's all normal. And if you feel it, we want you to be able to express that as part of your release of those emotions.
Yes. Okay. Kenya said yes. So she was talking about when we talked about, the time.
Yeah, time makes things.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't sting as much, right? It feels a little easier, maybe a little. It's hard, right?
You would think.
You would think, but the pain is always there because as you said, you will think of a time or something that person did or said, and it can bring up all the emotions again.
So, and it may feel like you're like time heals all things, but it may feel like now that you thought about it, now you feel like, oh, I'm starting all over again. So you may think about that person for the next couple of days because of something reminded you of that person until you get past that time.
Yeah, and that's okay. Those emotions will always sort of be there. I think time helps us to be able to deal with it, to sort of, feel those emotions when they come up, and we have these grieving moments again, right? When you think about them and the loss and the missing them, all those things will always be with us when that person passes on.
Dr. Michelle, give us some words of wisdom. I mean, you have already given us a lot of information that we really can just take a step back and do an assessment to see, if we're having some of these physical effects of grief. Can you give us or someone some words of wisdom who may be dealing with this and just don't even know what to do or where to start?
Yeah. So I would start with the first thing I would say is listen to your body and what it's telling you, right? And if something doesn't feel right, either talk to your provider about it or sort of think about what's going on. If it's the sleep, if it's abdominal pain, if it's you're feeling sick, you're tired, can't concentrate, right? Listen to your body and then talk to someone, either friend, provider, pastor, therapist. to help you to sort of understand what's going on and what's the next step for you. So listening to your body is the first thing I would say. And then for those of us who are around that person is to be supportive, allow them to feel whatever they feel, from the anger, the sadness, the denial. All of those things are normal parts of grief, and be there to listen, to bring food, to take them out, whatever it is that they need at that time.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for your wisdom that you share every single month. And I know we're getting ready to celebrate the holiday. So I pray that you and your family have an amazing holiday, a safe holiday.
Yes, you as well. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Stay safe and stay well.
Will do. As we bring the show to a close, I'm going to end the show with the sponsors who help me to just go live every single Monday to make sure that you get the information to help you make better lifestyle choices as it relates to your health. Gloria Dotson with Mary Kay, catering to all of your beauty needs from head to toe. Paula Kelly with Allstate, fulfilling all of your insurance needs in one place. So join me next Monday right here on Intellectual Radio at 6 p.m. I'll leave you with these words of wisdom. It is important to remember you are not alone. Asking for help is an important step in the grieving process. As always, thank you for tuning in to Warriors Talk with author and founder Lady ReShell, where we are changing lives one warrior at a time.
Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Warriors Talk with Lady ReShell. To find out more about Warriors Talk, follow at Warriors Talk, the number 1, on all social media outlets, and Warriors Talk with Lady ReShell on YouTube. Please join us next week and every Monday evening at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on intellectualradio.com for Warriors Talk with Lady ReShell, where we encourage, educate, and empower you into action.